Something has been visiting me at night. Please help. Written by Psyoptic Nerve. Featuring Ein VA. The events of the last 3 nights have left me afraid for my life and at a loss for what to do. I need advice. I'm hoping somebody here might have some idea about what is happening to me. For some context, I live in a small rural town in Maine, a place with more cows than people. I own a large house built in the 1920s, and 6 acres of wooden land. My closest neighbors are a quarter mile up the road. It started with my dogs acting weird the first night. Their hair stood on end. They stood at the back door and whined. It's pretty common for critters to come up to the house. Usually it's just a raccoon looking for food. But the way they were acting bothered me. I took a flashlight and looked out the window, seeing nothing. My shepherds were now growling, both with their teeth bared, still looking at the door. It was late at night, probably around 10. My wife and children were asleep upstairs. I began to worry that the dogs were going to wake them. I shushed them, still looking out the window for whatever they were hearing. Their behavior was making me paranoid, and I went to get my shotgun, wondering if a bear had wandered into the yard. By this time, my wife had come down to see what was going on. I told her what was up, and that I was going to go out and look. Cautiously, I made my way onto the porch. We have motion lights in multiple locations around the house, but none of them had turned on, which only made me more nervous. My spine was tingling as I left the porch and stepped into the snow. I felt overwhelmed with the sensation that something was going to come rushing at me from the trees. I nearly had a heart attack when I triggered one of the motion lights. After regaining my composure, I had to admit defeat, and I went back inside. My dogs were still growling and staring at the door. My wife said she checked out our cameras, the kind that record when motion is detected, but hadn't seen anything on them. We were both extremely uneasy, but tried to rationalize the situation. I suggested that squirrels might be in the walls, making sounds that only dogs could hear. It wasn't a very satisfying conclusion, and we both knew it, but it was all we could do. Neither of us slept well that night. The next morning, the camera still hadn't recorded anything unusual. The next night, it was my daughter who was on edge. She was unusually quiet at bedtime, and after we read some books, she looked at me very seriously.
Papa, I had bad dreams last night. I don't want to sleep by myself. There was something under my bed, I think. I heard it moving around.
I got chills. The adult part of me tried not to react, but deep down inside, I was horrified. My wife overheard and decided that she would put a mattress down on the floor. They would all sleep in the 2-year-old's room. My daughter was happy with this, and my wife did a good job of making it sound like it was for fun, but we secretly knew something was very off. I woke up in the early morning to my wife gently shaking me.
You need to see this,
she whispered, handing me her phone. The screen showed a recording from one of the cameras. The angle was from the back porch, where the dogs had been staring the first night. At first there was nothing, and then every motion light came on at once. I stared intently, waiting for something to come into view. Nothing did.
What do you think that was?
She asked. I shook my head. It was early and I was having a hard time thinking rationally. I had no answer. This brings me to last night. Like the night before, my wife slept with the kids in the room at the end of the hall, leaving me in the master bedroom alone. I was shaken by the last few nights. My mind revisited childhood fears as I laid awake in the dark room. Each time I began to doze off, I would twitch back awake, convinced that I had heard something. I would stay perfectly still, straining to hear down the hall. A few times I got up to check on them. Thankfully, they were always sleeping peacefully. I woke up to a strange sensation. I was lying on my back, which is very rare for me, and I was unable to move. I immediately realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis and tried not to panic. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it, just barely able to make out its movements in the darkness. There, in the farthest corner of my room, a shadow was emerging. I watched helplessly as it rose from the floor, moving an inch at a time. I tried to scream. I tried to thrash away, but I was frozen, bound by something invisible. Over the next half hour, its form became more visible. Whatever it was seemed to be composed entirely of shadow. It had long limbs that stretched over the ceiling and hovered over my stiff body. The length of time that I tried to escape made it all the worse when the thing finally made contact with me. Nimble fingers grazed my skin so lightly that I might not have noticed if I hadn't been watching it happen. It slowly tightened its grip on my arm, raising its free hand just below my shoulder. It took me a long time to realize that it was penetrating my skin. Something thin and needle-like made its way deep into my flesh, making the slightest contact with my bone before retreating just as slowly. Then I woke up. I panicked, bolting to the bedroom at the end of the hall. My footsteps woke them all up, but they were okay. They were all unharmed. No sinister shadows plagued them. It took some time for me to calm down. After my wife got the kids back to sleep, she came to see how I was doing. I told her what had happened, omitting some of the details to prevent her from being alarmed. She, like I, seemed to think that it had been a nasty bout of sleep paralysis.
I think we're all just feeding into each other's paranoia, you know? I think we just need to relax.
She sighed, rubbing my back while we talked. I could have dismissed it. I could have been convinced that the dark figure was only a dream, if not for this morning. As I was getting into the shower, I glanced at my reflection, noticing the mark on my arm. It was unmistakable. There is a pentagram on my skin, a deep punctured mark in the center. I can feel a hard object beneath, something that I know I am going to have to remove myself. For now, I have it covered up. I don't know what to do. I am fearful for all of our lives. I'm going to send my wife and children far from this house, though I don't know if this will help. If anybody knows what this thing was or how to proceed, please help.